I'm getting bored here. Alright guys, it's enough.
Booze and booze.
I've lived out west most of my life, mostly California and Nevada, bouncing around the edge of the desert like a loose screw on the map. I've always felt more at home where things are dry and cracked and too hot for polite company. Give me cactuses, dirt, and big sky overpacked interstates and suburban sprawl any day. I'm not some crusty old hermit or a gun nut either, just a guy who likes to be alone with the elements. I guess you could say I'm a naturalist, though I never bothered with the title. I like looking up at the stars, poking around rock beds for fossils, memorizing Latin names of desert plants, and of course learning what they could cure if chewed, boiled, or burned. Most people don't get it. You go out there all by yourself. Yeah, I do, and have for years, and I love every single second of it. I've seen weird stuff out there though, for sure. Flashing lights that I couldn't track, hikers who vanished into the hills without saying goodbye. Sometimes it felt like the landscape changed shape between morning and night. One time a few years ago, I came across a perfectly circular patch of charred brush, just black, brittle death in this perfect ring, and not a single clue as to what could have caused it. I personally chalked it up to lightning. You kind of do it a lot out there. Chalk things up, write them off, tell yourself it's the weather or wildlife or maybe even dehydration. But a couple of years back, I saw something that changed how I looked at everything, changed how I sleep, changed how I hiked, changed the way that I looked at the sky. At first, it was a regular trip. I took my truck out past Tacopa, past all the little forgotten towns and half-buried homesteads. I was aiming for a spot that I'd camped out maybe 5 times before this, an old plateau near a dried up spring that still had a few stubborn mesquites clawing through the rock. You could see for miles and miles up there, and you could even hear yourself think, my kind of place. I planned on a long weekend, nothing fancy. I had my usual gear, which included a tent, fold-out chair, single burner stove, some beer, and a bag of trail mix, and of course couldn't forget my notebook. I keep this little journal of plant sightings and oddities, something to thumb through in the evenings, and it calmed my head. First night went pretty smoothly. Cool air around me, good sleep, no wind. I even saw a pair of foxes scurry past the edge of my camp, silent as smoke, like ghosts on patrol. But on that second night, it was different, right from the jump. The air seemed to get thicker somehow, even though the humidity was nothing. The light just felt off, like the desert had slipped on a mask while I wasn't looking at it. And then I looked up, and that's when shit started to get real. It started with the dark, not nighttime, I'm used to all of that, but a kind of hollow, smothering dark that didn't really make sense. No clouds, no wind, no moon, nothing, just black. Even when I looked for familiar constellations, I couldn't pin down more than a few flickers. It was like the sky had swallowed its own light, a black ceiling above. I sat by the fire, chewing on jerky and sipping at a beer, trying not to let it bug me. I've been in isolated places before where the silence gets inside your bones, sure, of course, but this time it really was different. The desert has this rhythm, wind brushing over stone, owls hooting, insects singing. But on that night, there was none of that, no ambient noise. It was almost like I'd gone underwater. My ears were ringing slightly, like pressure was building up in my head. And that's when I noticed that first light. It blinked into view above the horizon, faint like a slow satellite, but with this weird pulse to it. It didn't track across the sky like a plane or a meteor. It hovered, stuttered, and shifted. Then another light appeared beside it. Then 2 more. Within a minute, 10 or 12 of them had fanned out in this loose cluster, like a constellation being born right out in front of me. I set my beer down and stood up. The lights were moving like they were underwater, drifting and rising in slow, smooth arcs. Now, I should have been scared right there, but I wasn't. Not yet, just completely fascinated. I've seen weather balloons, military flares, even experimental aircraft buzzing around out here. But this was not like any of those. They moved so organically, it felt like they were watching me too, looking for something. I grabbed my binoculars and aimed them at the nearest one. What I saw made me drop them right into the dirt below. Each light had this central body, round and metallic, but soft looking, almost like jelly or smoked glass. Hanging beneath it were these tendrils, long and flickering like seaweed in a current. But they sparked too. Flickers of blue and green light ran up and down them, like veins pumping electricity. Honestly, it looked like a jellyfish, massive ones, floating in a formation, hunting even. And they were moving closer by the second. I backed up to my fire and scanned the sky again. The cluster was definitely angling toward me, not fast, but steady. I felt it in my gut first, like static building up in my skin. That's when the fear totally kicked in. That lizard brain panic came full force. I slapped out that fire, tossing the rest of my beer into the coals, and kicked dirt over it. I ducked into my tent and scrambled for the little LED lanterns that I kept clipped inside. I turned them off and killed everything. The only thing still throwing light was my truck, a tiny green glow from the dashboard. I debated on staying in the tent, but I felt too exposed, like waiting to be zipped up and carried off. I slowly crawled out, careful not to make any noise, jogged low and quick to my truck. I threw myself inside the cab and locked the doors, and laid flat across the bench with my pistol in one hand and phone in the other. No bars, of course, just this big red X where the service icon should have been. I don't know if that meant a dead zone or if something up there was blocking out the signal. I hadn't had service since I've been out here, but I also hadn't seen that X until just now. I put some papers over the dash to block out that security light and waited to see what would happen next. The lights continued to descend. I watched them through the front windshield, my face half covered with my jacket. One of them peeled off from the rest, smooth and slow, and started spiraling directly above me. I could see the tendrils now glowing steadily at the ends, brushing at the air like they were tasting it. The silence swallowed everything. I swear I couldn't even hear my own breathing. Then came this sound, a low humming vibration. It wasn't mechanical, it felt alive, like a giant throat clearing its voice across the sky. It started deep, almost too low to hear, then began to rise in pitch, climbing and climbing until my teeth hurt from the pressure itself. And that's when everything shook. Not like an earthquake, just a single violent jolt. The ground trembled, my truck bounced on its shocks, my ears popped, and the pressure dropped so fast I thought my head might split open. And then just like that, they stopped. All the lights, all at once, froze in the sky. No movement, no more pulsing, just hovering. I blinked twice and then they were gone. And I mean gone, like somebody pulled the plug on reality. No slow fade, no streaking trails. 1 second they're there, the next, that just endless blank sky again. I sat up in my truck panting and sweating through my clothes. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely even hold the pistol. I stayed just like that until dawn, never left the cab, and every single tiny sound, the wind shifting a tarp, metal creaking, pebbles settling, it sent my pulse through the roof. By the time the sun had cracked the horizon, the desert looked normal again. Too normal, if you ask me. Like it was pretending, putting on a show, and I'm not buying it. Eventually, I found the nerve and stepped out of my truck slowly. The fire pit was still there, half covered. Tent still stood untouched. Everything looked exactly how I left it. I broke camp like a man getting rid of evidence. No coffee, no breakfast, just stuffed everything into the bed of my truck, half-assed and dusty. Almost like I was trying to outrun something that might be still circling overhead. The whole time I never looked up, I couldn't. Have you seen that movie Nope? When that came out a few years later, I was fucking horrified because that's exactly what I felt like a predator was in the sky above me. That whole drive back to town felt like I was being followed. Every shimmer in the heat haze, every glint in the horizon, I thought, there they are again. I kept checking my mirrors, waiting for one of those jellyfish things to rise out of the ground or drop from the sky, but nothing came. Just me in the desert and the long empty road ahead of me. When I got back home, I showered twice and slept for nearly 16 hours. No dreams, just black. I woke up feeling different. Not sick exactly, just not right. Like the edges of things were off, colors were too bright, food too bland, and I couldn't shake this constant low-grade buzz in the back of my head, like a warning tone that never shut off. For days, I couldn't stop checking the sky, even during the daylight. Something inside me kept me waiting for another flicker, a return. I didn't tell anyone because who the hell would believe me? I barely believed it, and I was there. I started to second guess myself, going back over those details like I was building a court case against my own brain. But there was no alcohol poisoning, no signs of heat stroke, no drugs involved. But then something happened that sealed it all for me. About 5 days after I got back, I saw a piece in the paper, just a throwaway blurb near the back. It said something to the effect of, "Strange lights over the Mojave." Some truckers had reported glowing objects hovering near 127, near, get this, Tacopa. One guy said it looked like floating sea creatures. Another claimed his GPS shorted out and his hair stood on end. They all said the lights just vanished. And that was the confirmation I really didn't want. I cut my trips down after that, stopped going solo. I'll still hike and camp, but not the way I'm used to. Not way out there. Not where help's more than a scream away. I keep my gear light and my radio on and my phone charged, and I never let the fire go out. Not anymore. Sometimes I'll be walking just out past the hills behind my place and feel it again. That pressure, that stillness. I'll look up and scan the clouds and scan the blue, scan the night. And nothing ever shows. Still, I know what I saw, and I know something else is out there, watching, testing, maybe even waiting for something or maybe for someone. Every now and again, I think about beaming a flashlight up into the sky, just to see what happens, just to prove that it wasn't all in my head. I got into solo camping during one of the worst stretches of my life. It was right after COVID lockdowns had started to ease up slowly, when people were still jumpy inside grocery stores, still sanitizing their mail, still wearing masks even in their own cars. I had just lost my job, a marketing gig that I had a few years invested in, and then, of course, and a week after that, my boyfriend of 3 years decided it was time for him to quote-unquote reevaluate his path and dumped me over Thai takeout on my own goddamn couch. So there I was, unemployed, heartbroken, and stuck inside with a sour stomach and far too much time to think. I couldn't handle those walls closing in on me anymore, so one night I packed a bag, tossed my old hiking boots in the trunk, and drove until the lights disappeared behind me. I didn't even have a real plan. Just found this half-empty campsite up in Big Bear, then set up a borrowed tent inside the dark. That first trip was clumsy, cold, and kind of pathetic, but it was also the first time that I'd felt quiet inside months. I sat by the fire with no Wi-Fi, no texting, no bullshit, and I felt like maybe I hadn't completely dissolved into nothing after all. So I kept going after that. Something about having to take care of myself out there, about being the only person I could rely on. It just lit up something inside of me. I got better at it. I started learning real bushcraft. I bought a better tent, picked up a propane grill and some cooking gadgets. I brought friends sometimes, but most of the time I like going all by myself. There's just something sacred about it, like pressing a reset button that nobody else could reach. So when I decided to take this solo trip a few months ago, It felt like no big deal. I'd already done this dozens of times. This time I chose a new area, a state park about 3 hours from my house, somewhere I had not camped before. It was remote but not dangerous. There were trails, streams, and even some emergency outposts along the perimeter. I told my sister where I was going. I checked the weather, and I brought everything that I always bring. It literally just felt like another outing, but this time it wasn't. I noticed it that first night, something was already off, but at the time I didn't quite realize it. I didn't feel it until later on, but looking back now, I think the woods knew I was alone, and I think somebody else knew that I was alone too. I set up my camp the way I always do, efficiently, borderline obsessive. My little one-person tent went up in a flat patch between two trees, and I strung a thin paracord perimeter around it, which was also clipped with tiny tripwire alerts that let out a soft chime if anything crossed the line, just enough to wake me up if a raccoon or maybe something bigger wandered a little too close. I brought my usual gear: propane grill, folding chair, med kit, fire starter kit, my Kindle, and a water canister that I could refill from the nearby spring. It was so beautiful out there. The air had that stillness that makes you breathe a little slower, helps you appreciate the entire process just a little more. I spent that whole afternoon hiking a loop trail that dipped through a gulch and then ran alongside a wide, clear stream. I soaked my feet in the water, read a book about fungi, even found some edible slippery jacks along the trail. It was good, peaceful. When I got back to camp, I cracked open my little wine bottle and fired up the grill. I brought a ribeye and some cut up squash and an onion inside foil. I always eat really good when I camp. Maybe because I'm actually hungry, or maybe because there's nobody to rush me. The sun had dipped below the trees while I was eating, and the sky lit up in this orange and purple. I sat there with warm food in my belly and wine in my hand, staring at the stars starting to peek out. And then, like an idiot, I decided to go take a leak before I got cozy inside my sleeping bag. I walked maybe 40-50 yards from camp, more than I meant to. There was a little ridge that looked like it had a nice view, and I guess I wanted to soak in some of the moonlight. The top of the hill gave me a shot of the treetops and a sliver of the moon on the stream. I did my business behind a rock, zipped up, and wiped my hands with a sanitizing cloth. That's when I realized I had no idea which way I'd come from. I turned around and stared at the trees, trying to remember which path I'd taken through the brush, but everything looked the same to me. I didn't panic, at least not right away. I picked a direction that felt right and started walking with what I thought was confidence. But after 10 minutes, the trees did not look familiar. The slope of the land felt different. My tripwires would have chimed by now. And that's when it sank in that I was lost. I tried backtracking, but that didn't help. I turned off my flashlight a few times and tried to see if the dim glow of my lanterns would lead me back. Nothing though, no light, no sound, just a long lonely hush hanging around in the trees. That buzz from the wine had evaporated. My stomach clenched up and I knew I couldn't risk wandering in circles all night long. So I started looking for shelter. It had been an hour or so at this point, and I needed rest if I wanted to find my way back in the morning. I found this rock outcrop with just enough room to curl up behind. I pulled some brush around me like a blanket and tucked myself away. I didn't sleep much. Every twig that snapped would make my pulse spike. At one point, I thought what I heard was a coyote in the distance, and I almost started crying, but I swallowed it down. All I could do was wait for morning. When the sun finally rose, it was like somebody cracked open the world again. The light made me feel braver, sharper. I stood up and stretched and dusted myself off. I took a slow, careful walk through the woods, trying to move in a straight line, scanning for my tracks or anything familiar. After an hour or so, I stumbled onto a trail. Not a road, just a narrow, packed earth hiking path. I didn't know exactly where it led, but at least it felt like progress, I guess. And that's when I noticed him. A tall, lean, maybe 40-something with gray beard and one of those sun-bleached hats with a flap in the back. He had a hiking pack on and a water bladder strapped to his chest. He was moving with real confidence. I flagged him down fast and explained what had happened, how I gotten turned around after dark and slept in the woods. He listened to me, nodding patiently. "I've done that once or twice," he said. "You're lucky it wasn't colder. People freeze to death out here all the time." I responded back with laughing nervously and said something like, "Yeah, no kidding." He offered to walk with me, said he was doing a through hike of the park's back trails and knew them better than the staff did. I didn't love the idea of being somebody's charity case, but I also didn't want to get turned around again, so I accepted and we started walking together. At first it was easy talk, where we were from, what gear we used, even a little about the food trails. I told him I was headed back towards my camp and I thought it was southwest. He said he was going that way anyway. Then he asked me if I was out here all alone. I hesitated. Yeah, I said, but I check in with my people every day, just in case, you know? That made him laugh. Smart, he said. So, nobody would even know you're missing yet, huh? I stopped walking. So, I'm sorry, he said, smiling like he was joking. I didn't mean it like that. But he kept talking. Continued to say weird stuff too. Out here, people disappear. There's old caves, mine shafts, drop-offs. They wouldn't even find your body. I tried to pivot the conversation, but he would not drop it. He started asking what kind of knife I carried, if I had a whistle, if I knew how to scream loud enough to carry through the trees, if I had a gun, or if anybody would miss me back home. Then, after that, he stopped walking and just stood there. He looked at me like something had shut off behind his eyes. "You ever heard a bobcat scream?" he asked me. Before I could answer, he dropped his pack and lunged at me. I didn't have a weapon, he just tried to grab me, swinging his arms, snarling like a damn animal. I screamed and ducked sideways, scrambling over rocks and kicking dirt onto his face. He howled, literally howled, like he was part dog. And that's when I bolted. I didn't look back, I just ran, hard and stupid, ducking through the trees, weaving back and forth to try to throw him off. I heard him thrashing behind me, but the noise got softer and softer. I had the advantage. No pack, no gear, just pure terror and speed. And I think that's what saved me. I didn't stop running until my lungs were burning and my legs gave out beneath me. I collapsed behind a tree, half hidden in a mess of ferns and thorny brush, listening for the sounds of branches breaking or that sick barking laugh. But there was nothing, just the sound of my own heavy breathing and the buzz of blood in my ears. I think I stayed there for maybe 5 minutes, maybe 20. It's hard to tell when your entire body is locked into panic mode. Eventually I heard water, a trickle, a steady one. I pushed the trees toward it, hoping it was the same stream that I'd soaked my feet in the day before. And when I saw the bend in the trail, wide and flat with a little rock cairn that I'd made in the edge, I nearly collapsed again. I was back. I recognized that hill slope to my left, and sure enough, 100 yards ahead, partially hidden by the trees, was my tent. My stupid little orange tent, still zipped up like it'd been waiting for me this whole time. I looped around wide just to be safe. I didn't hear him anymore. I didn't see anything moving behind me, but I'm not taking any chances. When I got back to camp, I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just went straight for my stove, fired it up with shaking hands and made some coffee. I needed that ritual back, the normalcy. I stirred powdered creamer into that tin mug like it was some kind of exorcism. Then I sat in my chair with the hot metal against my palms and waited to feel human again. He never came. No footsteps, no distant yelling, nothing. I half expected to find the tripwire alarms tripped or some sign that he'd been inside my camp and messed with something. Torn up gear, footprints, anything. But there was nothing. If it wasn't for the ache in my thighs and the scratches up and down my arms, I might have believed that I imagined the whole thing, but I know I didn't. I know what I saw, and I know what I ran from. I wonder pretty often if that guy actually meant to hurt me, or if he was trying to scare me or give me a dose of reality, I don't know. Either way, he knew the trail systems better than I did. If he wanted to find me, I think he could have pretty easily. Although, I try not to dwell on that fact. I I took my first and only trip to Japan during a summer break from college. It was supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing, and I really treated it that way. I spent the better part of my year saving up for it, planning every detail, and double-checking my itinerary. Flights, train passes, museum tickets, lodging, translation apps. I even made laminate cards with common phrases just in case my phone had died. The trip was my reward after a brutal semester and a nasty breakup, and I wasn't gonna waste a second of it. Tokyo was exactly as overwhelming and electric as I hoped it to be. Osaka was food heaven. I took a bullet train to Hiroshima and stood in the Peace Park in total silence for almost an hour. I toured some temples, shrines, battle sites, animation studios even, and drank a coffee inside a cafe where this robot took my order and then bowed. I even made it out to the coast one of those days and stared at the Pacific from the other side, feeling like I just walked through the screen of a dream that I'd had since I was 12 years old. It was all completely unreal in the best possible way. Now, the camping trip though, that was the part I should have left out. It was meant to be this kind of palate cleanser before I flew back home. A single night off-grid in a forest that I'd read about online, famous for its untouched beauty and welcoming attitude towards foreign travelers. There were local businesses that rented gear and even helped transport visitors to the park's trailhead. I booked a set through this reputable-looking company, picked up a small backpack of equipment, which was a tent, sleeping bag, propane burner, mess kit, and then rode this small shuttle van out toward the hills. It was cheap, cheerful, and seemed just rugged enough to feel authentic. The driver dropped me off at a signpost that said in broken English, "Path goes right, no forget trail." I nodded and then thanked him. The trail was well worn at first, wide and pleasant, dotted with these little carved statues and hand-painted markers. I'd say about 2 hours in, the crowds started to thin. I passed fewer and fewer hikers, most of them being older couples or university kids on group outings. When I reached the ridge that split into 3 separate trails, I went left, away from the groups, deeper and further into the green. And I think that was my mistake. I went too far. There was a stillness out there that I wasn't quite ready for. The air smelled thick with moss and ocean mist. The trees were ancient, knotted and spindly, with branches that looked like fingers groping through the fog. Everything out here felt muted. I found this small clearing with the remnants of an old fire pit. Somebody had definitely camped here before, though probably not anytime recently. It felt super remote, but not impossible. So for me, it felt perfect. But the longer I stayed there, the more I had this overwhelming sensation that I'd wandered into some place that I should not have. I set up camp like I'd done back home, tent facing the trees in case it rained, fire pit cleared, small folding stool set out for dinner prep. The rental gear was well worn but functional. I boiled some noodles on that little propane burner, dumped a vacuum-sealed bag of curry, and sat there eating while the light disappeared into the trees. The deeper the night went, the less I liked how the place just sounded, or I guess a better way to describe it is it didn't. Back home, even in the remote forests, you hear wind and birds and insects, maybe frogs or owls. Here it was just dead air. There was a fog in the trees that was pale and low, rolling between trunks like smoke that wouldn't rise. My fire crackled, but it felt like the noise didn't go too far, like it was being swallowed up before it could even echo. Still, I told myself I'm just unfamiliar with the place. It's new, a new country, different wildlife, and a different climate. Maybe the silence out here is normal. Maybe the humidity dampened the sound. Maybe I'm just being soft. But not long after this, I started hearing things. At first, it was distant, a rustling, quick and light. Not like deer or anything heavy. It sounded like footsteps, human ones, but they were far too erratic. Too fast and then too slow, and then there would be nothing. I stood up with my flashlight in hand and scanned the woods. I didn't see anything. I clicked the beam off and listened once more. Silence responded, and then, moments later, laughter. It echoed faintly through the trees. A man's laugh, sharp and clipped. Then, a second voice, maybe a woman's. It was higher pitched and giggling like somebody trying not to get caught. It didn't make any sense to me. There were no other campers out here. I pushed at least 2 miles beyond the last posted trailhead. and I hadn't seen a single tent on the way in. So I found myself calling out, just a quick, "Hello?" More instinct than with any confidence. And of course, I got no answer back. I walked a slow circle around the camp, flashlight scanning every branch, every rock, but there was nothing. I was finally about to write it off as a distant sound travel when I saw movement on the edge of the clearing. A shadow, upright, human-shaped. It stood just far enough into the trees that I couldn't make out every detail. Just a silhouette, darker than the dark around it. Then it stepped back and vanished. No sound, no crunch of leaves, just gone. I backed up towards the tent, flashlight jittering across the brush. Another shape flicked through the beam, this one crossing from the right to the left and lower to the ground. Too fast to see it clearly. My heart thumped so loud I could feel it in my gums. More laughter, and this time it was closer, but I couldn't place the direction. Then came the voices, not English, Japanese maybe, but not casual conversation. Chanting, reciting something. I even heard clapping. Whispers layered over one another, too fast and rhythmic to follow. It felt like I was now being surrounded, but whenever I turned on the light, there was nothing there. And then I heard cars. Not actual engines, more like the illusion itself of traffic. I could hear horns, muffled conversations, even a pedestrian crosswalk chime that you hear in Tokyo. All of it sounded somewhere just beyond the trees, where I knew no road existed. My hands are shaking, and I killed the fire with my water canteen, grabbed what I could, and dove into my tent. I zipped it shut like that thin nylon could do anything to protect me. Inside, I sat with my back to the pole just listening. Those voices didn't fade. If anything, it got weirder. Children laughing, somebody singing off key, then some angry yelling, violent and guttural, and silence following that. Long stretches of it, then sudden rustling, quick footfalls circling the tent, or someone or something grabbing at the fabric, tugging it. A finger tapped the nylon near my head and I yelped and jerked away. When I shone my flashlight through it, nothing was showing on the other side. No shadows. I stayed frozen like that for hours, flashlight dying in my hand, sweat running cold down my back. I think eventually I nodded off from just pure exhaustion because the next thing I knew, a dim glow was seeping in through the tent walls. Dawn. I waited another 15 minutes just to be sure before I unzipped the tent and peeked outside. There was nothing around me, no footprints, no signs of anybody. The fire pit was a ring of cold ash. My camp looked undisturbed, ordinary, like the night hadn't even happened at all. I wasted zero time. I packed my gear, half folded into my pack, left the noodles and curry packets behind, and relit the fire just long enough to burn off the chill and chase those shadows away. I clipped my 2 LED lanterns to my chest straps, one to my belt, and kept a flashlight in my hand. The fog was thinner now. I could see a little clearer, so I picked a direction and hoped it was east and then started walking. I'd say 40 minutes in, I came across a trail that I don't remember. It looked very well worn, maybe a maintenance path, but I followed it, and after a while I saw 2 other hikers approaching me from the far end. Locals, older, dressed in layered gear and carrying walking sticks. They smiled when they saw me, clearly surprised. One of them said something in Japanese, and I tried to explain in broken phrases and hand gestures that I was lost, that I camped out here the night before. They looked at one another, clearly confused, and one of them said something that made my stomach drop, even through the language barrier. He pointed into the forest and said something like "Shori no shi akuma." The other one translated with the word I did not understand. Spirits. He made this waving gesture like people drifting through the trees. They said nobody camps there this deep anymore. Not here. Too many souls. They offered to walk me back to the main trail and I didn't hesitate. As we climbed along the narrow hillside, I started to feel steadier. They chatted softly amongst themselves, occasionally glancing my way like they were making sure I didn't wander off again. Eventually, we reached the junction, where a big signpost pointed back towards the parking lot. I turned to thank them, but I was alone. I stood there staring at the empty trail behind me, waiting for one of them to pop back out of the brush or something. Maybe they just stepped off for a bathroom break. Maybe they'd taken a shortcut back to the woods. I even called out this quiet, awkward, Hey? Like I could summon them with a single word, like they just hadn't vanished seconds before. But they were gone. I waited another minute, but nothing. Just that silence again, just like last night, thick and dead. I could have gone back to look for them, but I didn't. Not after everything I'd seen, not after what they'd said. Spirits. That was the word. I hadn't imagined that part. That was very real. The man's face had gone serious when he said it, and even if I didn't understand the full sentence, that warning was very clear. So I just turned around and walked. I followed that wider trail for what must have been another 45 minutes, maybe an hour. It looped through dense brush and then eventually opened up to a gravel parking lot lined with vending machines and a visitor's map. My rental car sat right where I left it, untouched and unbothered. I climbed in, locked the doors, and sat there in the driver's seat for quite some time, trying to shake off that leftover adrenaline. I checked my phone, no messages, no missed calls. I had full bars again, which felt like a miracle. I pulled up that trail map, double-checked the route, and sure enough, there was a note in tiny red lettering at the bottom of the map near the area that I'd camped in. It didn't say haunted exactly, but it mentioned something about local legends, spiritual activity, and advised visitors not to camp off the trail inside that region. Kinda wish I saw that earlier. Back in Tokyo, the rest of my trip went smoothly. I didn't tell anybody about the forest, at least not then. It didn't feel real enough to share with anybody, and I didn't want to sound like another dumb tourist who got spooked by trees and shadows. But even now, all these years later, I still think about those voices and that laughter, the impossible traffic sounds in the middle of the woods. I try to rationalize it all, try to chalk it up to nerves or bad sleep or some weird environmental illusion, but I can't. Not completely. I have no clue what I stumbled into that night. I don't know who or what was circling my tent, but I do know that I wasn't alone for any part of that trip.